I didn't wait to be chosen. I walked straight into the grand hall of Ravenspire, uninvited, unannounced, and entirely alone. The music stopped. Every head turned. Every fan snapped shut. Whispers cut through the silence like winter wind through silk. I had come to speak to the Duke of Thornfeld directly, not through a letter, not through a servant, not through the careful, cowardly customs that kept women quiet and obedient in drawing rooms across England. I walked to where he stood, tall and still as carved stone, with dark eyes that had never once softened for anyone in that room, and I spoke 4 words that no woman had ever dared say to him. "Will you walk with me?" The room held its breath. The Duke of Thornfeld didn't move. He looked down at me. This small and unremarkable woman who had just committed social ruin in front of half of London's finest. His jaw was tight. His gloved hands were still. And then, slowly, so slowly, the entire room leaned forward to hear it. He bent his head and whispered something against the quiet air between us. 2 words only, and those 2 words changed everything. Now the question everyone in that ballroom was asking is the same one you are asking right now. What kind of woman walks up to a man like that? What kind of courage or audacity or heartbreak drives a lady to throw away every rule she was raised to follow? And what did he whisper back? Stay with us, because this story is only just beginning, and it will not let you go easily. Before we continue, tell us, would you have done what I did that night? Drop your answer in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. If this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit the subscribe button. This is just the beginning. I had practiced the words 1,000 times in the darkness of my bedchamber. I had stood before my small looking glass, chin lifted, hands clasped, and whispered them to my own reflection until they no longer felt foreign on my tongue. I had told myself I was ready. I had told myself I was brave. I had told myself that what I was about to do was not madness, but necessity, and that necessity had carried women through far worse than a ballroom full of watching eyes. But nothing, not one single rehearsal, had prepared me for the moment the doors of Ravenspire Grand Hall swung open and the full weight of that glittering world fell upon me. The hall was magnificent and cruel in the way that only truly powerful spaces can be. Candles burned in rows so long they seemed to stretch into another country. The ceiling soared above like the inside of a cathedral, painted with clouds and golden figures that looked down with expressions of mild disapproval. Gentlemen in perfectly pressed coats stood in clusters, speaking in low voices about things that mattered only to themselves. Ladies moved between them like carefully arranged flowers, their laughter measured, their glances sharp. And at the far end of the room, standing slightly apart from everyone else, was the Duke of Thornfeld. I saw him before I had taken 3 steps inside. He was not the tallest man in the room, but he was the one the room arranged itself around, the way furniture arranges itself around a fireplace. People stood near him, but not too near. They glanced at him, but never for too long. Even the music, I thought, played a little more carefully when it reached the end of the hall where he stood. His name was Calder Vane. No, wait, that is wrong. His name was something that history had made heavy before he was old enough to carry it. The Duke of Thornfeld. That was how everyone spoke of him, always the full title, never just a name, as though the man inside had been replaced entirely by the rank. His true given name was Calder Drex, and I was perhaps one of only a handful of people in all of London who even remembered it, because his mother had once been kind to mine, long before kindness had any consequence between our families. I knew what they said about him: cold, precise, unreachable. A man who had declined 17 invitations to dance across 3 seasons without apology. A man who had once reduced a Viscount to stammering silence simply by looking at him too long. A man whose estate in the north was said to be beautiful and severe, like a painting of a landscape you would admire but never want to live inside. I also knew what they did not say. I knew that 3 years ago, his younger brother Pell had come to my father with a debt so crushing it could have swallowed our entire family whole. I knew that my father, proud and foolish, as only a gentleman with more honor than coin could be, had refused help from the Duke directly, and had instead sold something far more precious than money to repay it. I knew what that sale had cost my mother. I knew what it had cost me. And I knew that the Duke of Thornfeld, for all his cold perfection, had tried to stop it. That was the thing no one knew. That was the thing that had lived in my chest like a splinter for 3 years, too small to kill me and too sharp to ignore. He had tried to intervene. His letter had arrived 2 days too late. So here I was. My gown was not new. My gloves had been mended twice at the left thumb. My invitation to this evening had come through my cousin, Patrice, who moved in circles several steps above our current station, and had taken pity on me in a way that was generous and slightly humiliating all at once. Patrice was standing somewhere behind me now. I could feel her silent horror, radiating like heat from a hearth, because she had not known what I intended to do when I accepted her offer to attend. No one had known. I walked. The distance from the door to the far end of that hall was perhaps 40 yards. I know because I counted my steps. It was not from calm, but because counting was the only thing keeping my knees from buckling beneath me. 1, 2. The music continued. 3, 4. A woman near the refreshment table noticed me and leaned toward her companion. 5, 6. A gentleman I did not recognize frowned in my direction. 7, 8. The whispers began. I kept walking. I was 12 steps from him when he turned. I do not know what made him turn. Perhaps a servant had said something. Perhaps one of his companions had noticed the small disturbance moving through the crowd toward him, and had murmured a warning. Perhaps it was simply the instinct of a man who had spent his entire life being watched, and had learned to feel the direction of attention the way sailors feel the direction of wind. He turned, and his eyes found me immediately. They were darker than I had expected. In every memory I had of him from years ago, his eyes had been simply brown. But standing in the candlelight of Ravenspire, they were the color of deep water, of earth after rain, of something that had no simple name and did not need one. He looked at me and said nothing. I stopped 2 feet from him, close enough that I did not need to raise my voice, far enough that the distance was still proper. Around us, conversation had thinned to silence in a spreading circle, the way silence spreads when something has happened that everyone wants to witness, but no one wants to claim responsibility for watching. I said 4 words. "Will you walk with me?" I had not planned to say it so quietly. I had imagined my voice coming out steady and clear, shaped by all those rehearsals in the dark. But instead it came out the way truth usually comes out when it has been held too long, soft and slightly unsteady at the edges, but entirely, irrevocably honest. The Duke of Thornfeld looked at me for a moment that felt stitched from several separate moments pressed together into one unbearable length of time. His expression did not change. It was not cold exactly. It was contained, the way a room is contained when all its windows have been shut against a storm. Then he bent his head slightly toward me, just slightly, and he whispered 2 words. My pleasure. I felt the floor tilt. Not physically. I did not stumble. But something inside me shifted in a way I had not expected and could not immediately explain, because those 2 words, spoken in that voice, in that particular quiet, did not sound like the polished social response of a duke performing courtesy for an audience. They sounded like something else, entirely. They sounded like recognition. He offered his arm. I took it, and we walked out of that ballroom together, while behind us, half of London's finest sat in stunned and furious silence, and began, in that very moment, to absolutely ruin me. The garden at Ravenspire was nothing like the hall, where the hall was all fire and gold and the pressure of 100 watching eyes. The garden was dark and cool, lit only by the lanterns that lined the stone path in small pools of amber light. The night air carried the smell of late roses and something green and wet from the hedgerows. Above us, the sky was thick with clouds, and only a few stars had managed to push through, pale and distant, as if they too were watching, but had the decency to do it from very far away. We walked in silence for a while. I had not planned for silence. I had planned words. I had arranged them carefully, the way you arrange objects on a shelf before an important visitor arrives, each one placed just so, each one meant to lead naturally to the next. But now that I was here, now that his arm was beneath my gloved hand, and the sound of the ballroom had faded behind us, every prepared word dissolved like sugar in warm water, and left me with nothing but the truth. The truth was harder to arrange. "You do not remember me?" I said finally. It was not a question. He was quiet for 1 step, then 2. "I remember you," he said. I looked up at him. His face in the lantern light was composed and unreadable, which I was beginning to understand was not the same thing as being without feeling. It was more like a door that had been locked for so long the person inside had stopped listening for knocking. "Then you know why I am here," I said. "I suspect several things," he said carefully. "But I would rather hear it from you than assume." That surprised me. I had expected deflection, or worse, the kind of polite cruelty that passes for good manners in high society, the sort that acknowledges your presence while making perfectly clear your insignificance. Instead, he was giving me room to speak. He was waiting. My name was Ottoline Cresswick. My father had been a gentleman of modest means and enormous pride. 3 years ago, my family had lost nearly everything because of a debt that my father's younger associate had accumulated through recklessness and poor judgment. The associate's name was Drex, the Duke's brother. I had never blamed Calder Drex for what his brother had done. That would have been unfair, and I had been raised, whatever else might be said of our circumstances, to be fair. But the loss had been real, when my mother had spent the last 2 years of her life in a house that was too cold in winter because we could not afford the proper wood. She had died in the spring, 18 months ago, and I had stood at her grave and made myself a promise. I would not waste what remained. I would not sink quietly. And I would not pretend that the threads connecting my family's ruin to the Dreck's name were invisible simply because acknowledging them was uncomfortable. "I am here," I said, "because I have a proposal." His steps did not slow. "Go on. Your brother Pell has recovered his circumstances, I understand. He is now in a position of some comfort, managing your northern properties." I kept my voice even. "My family is not. My father is alive, but his situation is reduced. My younger sister Dottie is 17 and will need to be brought out next season, and the funds for that do not exist." I paused. "I am not asking for charity. I am asking for an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" he said. "I have skills your household needs," I said. "I was educated well, better than our current standing suggests. I speak 3 languages. I manage accounts. I am organized, discreet, and I do not gossip." I steadied my breath. "I am asking to be considered for a position as correspondence secretary at Thornfeld House. A paid position, properly arranged, properly documented, with a wage that reflects the work." The silence that followed was different from the earlier silence. This one had weight. "You walked across that ballroom," he said slowly, "in front of everyone, and asked me to walk with you, because you wanted to apply for a secretarial position." "I walked across that ballroom," I corrected gently, "because I could not reach you any other way. You do not accept callers on Tuesday afternoons like ordinary gentlemen. Your secretary, Mr. Griff, returns every letter I have sent over the past 4 months, unopened. And your solicitor, a Mr. Dunbar Pleat, informed my cousin Patrice's husband that the Duke of Thornfeld was not presently considering any new household staff." He stopped walking. I stopped too. We stood on the path between 2 lanterns, in the space where neither pool of light quite reached, and he looked at me with an expression I could not fully read, but felt, in some wordless way, was not entirely unfavorable. "You sent letters," he said. 4, I confirmed. "To between January and April. Griff returned them, yes." Something moved behind his eyes. It was not quite anger, but it was adjacent to it, the kind of contained reaction that a man exercises when he discovers something has been done in his name that he did not sanction. "I did not know," he said. "I assumed as much," I said, "which is why I came here." He turned and began walking again, slowly, and I fell into step beside him, because there was nothing else sensible to do. The path curved around a stone fountain that was not running, its basin filled with still water and a scattering of fallen leaves. We walked past it without stopping. "Miss Cresswick," he said. "Yes." "You understand that what you have done tonight will have consequences you may not have fully considered." "I considered them," I said. "What I have been considering them for 4 months. Society will talk." "Society already talks," I said. "They talk about my reduced circumstances. They talk about my mother's death. They talk about the fact that my father has not appeared at a single public function in 2 years. I have been the subject of talk for some time, Your Grace. Another evening's worth changes very little." He was quiet for a long moment. The clouds shifted above us, and a slice of moonlight fell across the path, pale and sudden, like a held breath finally released. "You are not what I expected," he said. There was no flattery in it, It sounded like an observation that had genuinely surprised him, the kind a man makes when reality refuses to match the shape he had prepared for it. "What did you expect?" I asked. He considered this seriously, which I appreciated more than I could say. "Someone angrier," he said at last. I thought about that. "I was angry," I said. "For a long time. But anger is expensive, and I could not afford to keep it." He turned to look at me then, fully, the way he had not quite looked at me since we entered the garden, and for a moment neither of us said anything at all. The lantern light caught the edge of his jaw, the straight line of his shoulder, the particular stillness of a man who is accustomed to revealing nothing and has just, perhaps, revealed something without intending to. "Come to Thornfeld House on Thursday morning," he said. "At 10 o'clock. Bring documentation of your qualifications. I will speak with Griff." I felt something loosen in my chest, but something I had been holding so tightly for so long that I had forgotten it was separate from breathing. "Thank you," I said. "Do not thank me yet," he said, and his voice was not unkind. "Thursday will tell us both considerably more than tonight has." We turned back toward the hall. The music had resumed inside, floating out through the tall windows in bright, oblivious waves. Behind those windows, I knew, the talk had already begun. My name was already passing from mouth to ear, from fan to fan, wrapped in astonishment and judgment and the particular delight that polite society takes in the spectacular mistakes of others. But I had walked into that hall with nothing but 4 words and shaking knees. And I was walking back with Thursday at 10 o'clock. That was enough. For tonight, that was more than enough. The door to the hall opened before us. Light and sound spilled out like something uncorked. I dropped my hand from his arm. He stepped aside to allow me entry first, and as I passed him, I caught, just barely, the faintest shift in his expression. Not a smile. Not quite. But close enough that something in me noted it carefully and held it close against all the cold things still waiting ahead. Thursday came the way difficult things always come, too quickly and not quickly enough at the same time. I arrived at Thornfeld House at 5 minutes before 10, because arriving exactly at 10 would have looked rehearsed, and arriving early by a full quarter hour would have looked desperate. 5 minutes was honest. 5 minutes said I had not slept well and had left the house too soon, but at least had the sense to walk slowly for the last street. Thornfeld House was not what I had imagined. I had imagined something cold and grey, all hard stone and narrow windows, the kind of house that discourages visitors by its very appearance. Instead, it was large and quietly beautiful, set back from the street behind iron gates that stood open, flanked by 2 stone pillars worn smooth at the edges by decades of weather. But the gardens on either side of the entrance path were not showy. They were orderly and serious, the kind of gardens tended by someone who valued discipline over display. I liked them immediately, which annoyed me, because I had not come here to like things. A butler named Mr. Ossian met me at the door. He was a tall man of perhaps 60, with a face arranged in permanent, careful neutrality, and eyes that assessed everything without appearing to assess anything. He took my card, examined it for precisely the right amount of time, and then led me through a corridor lined with dark wood paneling and portraits of people who all shared the same strong jaw and watchful expression. He showed me into a waiting room that was small and well-appointed, and left me there without a word. I sat. I arranged my hands in my lap. I looked at the fireplace, which was lit despite the mildness of the morning, and I thought about what I knew of Thornfeld House's occupants, because information, in my experience, was always better than nerves. The Duke lived here with a small permanent staff. Mr. Ossian, the butler, a housekeeper named Mrs. Quell, whom I had not yet seen, but whose reputation for severity had reached even my reduced social circle, a cook, several maids, and Mr. Griff, the secretary, who had returned my letters unopened and who I was entirely prepared to dislike on sight. There were also, I had learned through Patrice, 2 regular visitors who were practically residents in their frequency. The first was Lord Ambrose Fitch, the Duke's closest friend since their years at school together, a man known for his easy charm and his absolute loyalty to Calderdrex in all things. Or the second was Lady Dorinda Plume, a widow of considerable fortune and sharper considerable ambition, who had made no secret across 2 seasons of her intention to become the next Duchess of Thornfeld. It was Lady Dorinda Plume who opened the waiting-room door. Not a servant. Not Mr. Ossian. Not the Duke. Lady Dorinda herself, in a way that made perfectly clear she had been waiting for the opportunity and had perhaps arranged it. She was a handsome woman, perhaps 32, with the kind of self-possession that comes not from contentment, but from the constant practice of appearing content. Her hair was immaculate. Her posture was a statement. And her eyes, when they found me sitting by the fire with my mended gloves and my honest qualifications folder in my lap, I did something complicated and swift that she smoothed over immediately with a smile. "Miss Cresswick," she said warmly, as though we were old friends, and she had simply happened past. "What a surprising morning this is." I stood. "Lady Dorinda." I heard, of course, about the other evening at Ravenspire. She moved into the room without being invited, which told me everything about how she regarded this space. Everyone did. You were very brave or very bold, depending on who you ask. I was very practical, I said. She laughed, and it was a good laugh, practiced enough to sound genuine. Yes, I imagine that is one word for it. She settled into the chair across from where I had been sitting, arranging herself with the ease of someone who expects furniture to accommodate them. "I do hope you understand the position you have placed him in." "I applied for employment," I said. "I was not aware that was a position." Her smile stayed fixed, but her eyes cooled by several degrees. "He is a very private man. He values order, routine, discretion." She let each word sit. "The sort of disruption that enters through the front gates of a man's home after causing a scene at his acquaintance's ball is not, I think, quite what Thornfeld House requires." I looked at her steadily. "I caused no scene. I asked a question. He answered it. Everything that followed was the ballroom's own doing." Something shifted in her expression, a flicker of something genuine beneath the careful surface, and I realized with a start that it was not quite anger. It was something closer to fear. Not of me, exactly, but of what my presence here represented, which was the possibility that Calderdrex was capable of surprise, and that she had not been the one to surprise him. The door opened again. Mr. Griff entered first. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 28, with a precise manner and ink-stained fingers, and the expression of a man who managed his employer's world with total efficiency, and regarded any alteration to that world as a personal inconvenience. Behind him came Lord Ambrose Fitch, who was tall and fair and immediately filled the room with the kind of energy that makes everyone in it feel slightly more observed. And behind Lord Ambrose, last, filling the doorway, the way a word fills a silence it was always meant to occupy, came the Duke of Thornfeld. He looked at Lady Dorinda first. Something passed between them in that glance, brief and without warmth on his side, that told me she had not been invited to be here. Then he looked at me. "Miss Cresswick," he said, "thank you for coming." Lady Dorinda rose smoothly. "I was just keeping your guest company, Calder." She used his given name with the ease of long practice, and I watched her do it, understanding exactly why she had done it, and in front of whom. "That was kind of you," he said, in a tone that was entirely polite, and communicated nothing except that he had noticed. She took her leave with grace, which I respected, even as I understood that she had just declared something in that room as clearly as if she had written it on the wall. Mr. Griff sat across from me at the writing table near the window with a sheet of paper before him and a pen in his hand, and the interview began. It was thorough. I had expected that. What I had not expected was how thorough, or how closely the Duke himself listened, seated slightly to the side, saying very little, watching with those dark and attentive eyes, while his secretary worked through questions of language, correspondence, account management, and discretion. I answered everything honestly. When I knew something, I said so clearly. When I was uncertain, I said that too, which seemed to interest the Duke more than the certainties did. At one point, Mr. Griff asked how I would handle correspondence from parties who wrote with hostile or inappropriate intent, and I said I would document the letter, flag it immediately, draft a formal response for approval, and under no circumstances reply independently. Mr. Griff wrote something down. The Duke said nothing, but he stopped turning the ring on his right hand, which he had been doing at intervals throughout the interview, and did not start again. It was Lord Ambrose who broke the professional atmosphere. Because Lord Ambrose, I would come to understand, broke most atmospheres eventually, not maliciously, but constitutionally. "You walked straight up to him in the middle of Ravenspire," he said, not even attempting to fold the observation into something more formal. "I have known this man since we were 14 years old, and I have never done that." "Ambrose," the Duke said. "I'm simply noting it," Lord Ambrose said, entirely unrepentant, leaning back in his chair. "It is relevant character information." I looked at Lord Ambrose and said, I had tried every conventional method first, or this was what remained. Lord Ambrose looked at the Duke. The Duke looked at the ceiling briefly, in the way of a man with a genuinely good friend he cannot always manage. Mr. Griff set down his pen. "Your qualifications are in order," he said, with the precise reluctance of a man who had hoped to find otherwise. "Considerably so. That evening I received a letter at my father's house. It was written in a clear, even hand I did not recognize, which I would later learn was the Duke's own. He did not write letters through Griff when they were meant to carry weight. It said, 'The position is yours if you still want it. Report Monday at 9. There are conditions. We will discuss them then.' I folded the letter, set it on my writing table, and sat for a long time in the quiet of my room. Then I picked up my pen and wrote back. I still want it. Monday at 9. I look forward to the conditions. I sent it before I could reconsider. That, too, I was beginning to understand, was the only way to live. The conditions, as it turned out, were not what I had feared. I had imagined a list of restrictions, a set of rules designed to keep me at a safe professional distance from anything that resembled consequence. I had prepared myself for coldness wrapped in courtesy. I had told myself that whatever was offered, I would accept it, because the wage was real and Dottie's season was not going to fund itself, and pride had already cost my family more than it was worth. Instead, on Monday morning at 9 o'clock, the Duke of Thornfeld sat across from me in his study, which was a room of dark wood and full bookshelves, and one very large window overlooking the orderly garden, and he said this: "I want to be honest with you about the position you have accepted." I folded my hands. "Please." "The work is genuine, and it is considerable. My correspondence is extensive, and some of it is sensitive in ways that will require your complete discretion, not occasionally, but always." He paused. "The people who write to me are not always honest. Some of them are attempting to manage me. Some are attempting to extract from me, and some at present are attempting something I have not yet fully identified, which concerns me." I looked up. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward slightly. "Over the past 3 months, I have received a series of letters written under different names. Each one appears at first to be ordinary correspondence, business-related, estate-related, or social in nature. But each contains a small piece of information that no outside party should possess. Details about my financial arrangements, details about my family, or details about this household." The room felt quieter suddenly. "Someone close to you," I said. "Someone with access," he said carefully, "or someone being fed information by a person with access. I do not yet know which." He looked at me directly. "I tell you this not to alarm you, but because you will be handling my correspondence beginning today. And I need you to understand that this is not an ordinary secretarial post." "You are asking me to help you find the source," I said. "I am asking you to be observant," he said, "and to tell me immediately if you notice anything that does not sit correctly with you. Your instincts, based on evidence thus far, appear to be sound." I thought about Lady Dorinda Plume in the waiting room on Thursday. I thought about how she had known my name, my reason for being there, and the exact phrasing of what had happened at Ravenspire, all before any servant would logically have informed her. I thought about whether to say this now, or wait until I had something more solid than instinct and suspicion. I waited. A woman who speaks before she is certain only gets one chance, and I intended to use mine well. "Understood," I said. "I will be observant." The work began that same hour. Mr. Griff, to his credit, was professional in his handover, though I suspected he had been awake the previous night, rehearsing how to be professionally gracious while personally miserable. He walked me through the filing system, the correspondence calendar, the ranking of senders by urgency and relationship, and the particular shorthand the Duke used in his marginal notes, which looked like chaos and turned out to be a perfectly logical system once Mr. Griff decoded it with the air of a man reluctantly sharing a secret he had guarded for years. By noon, I had read 40 letters. By 2 o'clock, I had drafted responses to 14 and flagged 6 as requiring the Duke's personal attention. By 4, I had found something. It was not dramatic. It did not announce itself. It was a letter from a land agent in the northern county, written in plain and business-like language about a boundary dispute on one of the Duke's tenant farms. The contents were perfectly reasonable. But the letter was dated 11 days ago, and sitting beside it in the same folder was a social note from a gentleman named Lord Prentice Galt, dated 8 days ago, and which referenced the boundary dispute in passing as though it were common knowledge, despite the fact that the land agent's letter had apparently not been opened until today. Lord Prentice Galt should not have known about that dispute. I set both letters side by side on the desk and looked at them for a long time. Lord Prentice Galt was a name I knew. Not well, but enough. He was a man of middle rank and significant debts who moved on the outermost edges of the Duke's social circle. He was also, I recalled with a sudden sharpening of attention, a close acquaintance of Lady Dorinda Plume. I brought the letters to the Duke at 4:30. He read them both. His face gave nothing away, but the stillness that came over him was different from his ordinary stillness. More deliberate, like a man who has heard a sound in a dark room and gone very quiet in order to locate it precisely. "Well done," he said. "It may be nothing," I said, because I had learned by this point in my life that conclusions should be offered gently and then handed to the person who has to act on them. "It is not nothing," he said. He set the letters down. "Prentice Galt has been a peripheral figure in my affairs for 2 years. I have never given him particular attention." He picked up the social note again. "I will now." What followed over the next 2 weeks was the kind of quiet drama that looks, from the outside, like nothing at all. I worked, I read letters, I drafted replies, I organized, cross-referenced, flagged, and filed. I learned the rhythm of Thornfeld House the way you learn the rhythm of any living thing, by being still long enough that it stops performing for you and simply goes about its nature. I learned that Mr. Ossian made 3 rounds of the house every evening in the same order, and would not vary it for any reason. I learned that Mrs. Quell, the housekeeper, was not in fact severe, but simply economical with warmth, and that when she approved of something she said nothing, and when she disapproved she said nothing also, but slightly differently. I learned that Lord Ambrose visited on Wednesdays without fail, and spent an hour arguing with the Duke about things they both already agreed on, which appeared to be the primary language of their friendship. And I learned, slowly, that Lady Dorinda Plume visited on no fixed schedule, but always with some socially acceptable excuse, and always found reasons to be in rooms adjacent to the study where I worked. On the 14th day, she came to the study itself. I was alone. The Duke was with his solicitor in the East Room. Mr. Griff was out on an errand. The house was in one of its quiet afternoon moments, where the staff moved through it like ghosts, and the only sound was the distant settle of the fire. She opened the door as though she had every right to, because in her own estimation, she did. "Miss Cresswick," she said pleasantly, "I did not realize you were in here." "Lady Dorinda," I said, without rising, because I was an employee of this household, and she was a visitor, and the study was not her space, regardless of how she carried herself in it. Her eyes moved across the desk. She was good at appearing not to look while looking, but I had been watching her for 2 weeks, and I knew the movement now. "I was hoping to leave a note for the Duke," she said. "I will take it," I said. "That is part of my position." Something flickered. "Of course." She produced a folded note from her reticule, which she had ready in a way that suggested the story about not realizing I was in here was not entirely accurate. I took the note. I set it on the correspondence pile. I did not read it in front of her, and I did not set it aside separately, and I gave her no indication of what I intended to do with it, which was to bring it directly to the Duke the moment she left the building. She lingered for a moment, as though hoping I would say something she could use. I smiled pleasantly and returned to my work. She left. The note, when the Duke read it that evening, was social in content and perfectly innocent in appearance. But the handwriting on the envelope was not Lady Dorinda's. It was a hand I had seen once before in the files, on a short acknowledgement letter filed under general correspondence, signed with a name that did not match any primary contact. The hand belonged to Lord Prentice Galt. She had carried his letter to the Duke's desk and dressed it in her own errand. I watched the Duke's face as he made the same connection I had made 3 seconds earlier. The stillness came again, that particular, located quiet. "Miss Cresswick," he said. "Yes, I owe you considerably more than a secretarial wage." I looked at him across the desk, this man who had been made into a title before he was ready, who kept everything contained because the world had never offered him a room large enough to be anything else, and I felt something turn over gently in my chest, not loudly, not urgently, just a quiet and honest turning, like a page. "Pay me correctly," I said, "and we will call it even." He looked at me for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then, for the first time since Ravenspire, something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close enough that I noted it again, pressed it somewhere careful, and said nothing at all. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was the day I had begun to associate with trouble. It was not addressed to the Duke. It was addressed to me at Thornfeld House, which meant whoever sent it knew I was here, and wanted me to know they knew. There was no sender's name on the outside. Inside, the message was brief, written in a hand deliberately disguised, the letters too upright and even, the way handwriting looks when someone is consciously altering their natural style. It said, "You are sitting at a desk that was prepared for someone else. Leave before the chair is pulled from beneath you." I sat with it for a moment. Then I carried it to the Duke. He read it without expression. Then he read it again. He set it on the desk between us and pressed 2 fingers against the edge of it, as though testing whether it was real. "But when did this arrive?" he asked. "This morning, with the regular post." "You are not frightened," he said. It was an observation, not a question. "I am," I said honestly. "But being frightened has never stopped anything from happening, so I find it more useful to simply continue." He looked at me for a long moment. "Has anything else happened that you have not told me?" I had been considering whether to mention the other thing for 4 days. The other thing was smaller and could have been nothing, except that I had stopped believing in nothing several weeks ago. "Mrs. Quell came to me last week," I said. "She told me, in her way, which is to say she told me, while appearing to discuss something else entirely, that a woman had been asking questions about me at the market. Not a servant. A woman dressed as a gentlewoman, and asking the household cook what I was like, how long I stayed each day, whether I ever remained past dark." The Duke was very still. "I did not tell you immediately," I said, "because I wanted to see if it happened again, before I brought you something that might be nothing. And did it happen again? Yes, I said, 3 days ago. A different market, the same description of the woman. Our cook recognized her the second time. She believes it was a woman named Miss Sable Critch. The name landed in the room like a stone into still water. I watched the Duke's face and saw something I had not seen there before. Not anger, exactly. Something older and heavier than anger. Something that had been waiting a long time to be confirmed. You know that name, I said quietly. Sable Critch, he said, is Prentice Galt's cousin. He stood and walked to the window. She was employed briefly, 2 years ago, as a companion to a relation of mine. She was dismissed. I believed she had left London. She has not, I said. He turned from the window. No, it appears she has not. The shape of it was becoming clearer now, the way the shape of a room becomes clear when your eyes adjust to darkness. Prentice Galt needed something from the Duke, money most likely, or leverage, which was money's more dangerous cousin. Lady Dorinda Plume wanted a position in this household that was permanent and titled, and came with a ring. Sable Critch, with her history in the house, and her axe not yet finished grinding, was the thread that connected them. And I, who had arrived at Ravenspire with 4 words and mended gloves, or had walked directly into the middle of all of it. I think, I said carefully, that they expected this position to go to someone they could manage. Someone who would pass information in one direction and turn a blind eye in the other, and be grateful enough for the employment not to ask questions. The Duke returned to his chair. And instead they got you. And instead they got me, I agreed. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it without considering what answer you think I want. All right, I said. Are you safe, Miss Cresswick? At your father's house? Are you and your sister safe? The question caught me somewhere I had not fully guarded, because I had been so occupied with the professional dimensions of all this that I had not stopped to consider that the threatening letter, the questions at the market, the slow and deliberate intelligence gathering happening around me, all of it was also happening around Dottie, who was 17 and knew nothing about any of it, and had been sleeping peacefully in her small room 3 streets away while I built a career in someone else's drama. I do not know, I said. And that was the most frightening thing I had said in weeks. The Duke called for Mr. Ossian. He called for Lord Ambrose, who arrived within the hour with his easy manner entirely suspended, replaced by something alert and capable that reminded me people are always more than the surface they present in comfortable rooms. By evening, a plan had been made. Well, my father's house would have 2 additional staff, arranged discreetly through Lord Ambrose's household, and entirely untraceable to Thornfeld. Dottie would be told only that a change in domestic arrangements had been made, nothing more. I would continue my work as normal, because the moment I altered my behavior, whoever was watching would know the intelligence had been gathered and moved to a different method, and the Duke would invite Lord Prentice Galt to dinner. I looked at him when he said that. Dinner, I repeated. If Galt believes he is being drawn into favor, he will relax, the Duke said. A relaxed man makes errors. I want him to make one where I can see it. Lord Ambrose looked at me across the table. He is considerably more strategic than he appears, he said, in the tone of a man offering a travel warning about a country he loves. I had noticed, I said. The dinner was set for Friday. On Wednesday, something happened that none of us had planned for. Pell Drex came to Thornfeld House. The Duke's younger brother arrived without notice, which I gathered from Mr. Ossian's expression was not unprecedented, but was always unwelcome. He was brought to the study, where I was working, and he stood in the doorway, looking at me with an expression of complete surprise that slowly reorganized itself into something more complicated. He was younger than the Duke by perhaps 5 years, with the same dark eyes, but a face that wore its feelings more openly, like a house with all its curtains drawn back. He was not a bad-looking man. He was not a bad man, I did not think. But he was a man who had done a careless and devastating thing, and had spent years being comfortable in the aftermath, while others were not. "You are Miss Cresswick," he said. "I am," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Ottoline Cresswick. Your father is Bernard Cresswick." "Yes." He sat down, without being invited, in the chair across from my desk, and he looked at his hands for a long moment. He was not performing. I had seen enough performance lately to recognize its absence. "I heard you were here," he said. "I came because I thought I should come before someone else made it into something it is not." "What is it?" I asked. "It is guilt," he said simply. "I came because I owe your family a debt that cannot be repaid in money, and I have been telling myself for 3 years that there was no adequate gesture, and so no gesture was required." He looked up. "That is cowardice dressed as practicality, and I have run out of patience with myself." I looked at him for a long time. "My mother is dead," I said. Not with anger, just with truth, because he deserved the weight of it without cruelty. "I know," he said. "I am sorry. I am genuinely, completely sorry." I believed him. That was the difficult part. It would have been easier not to. "Tell me," I said, "what you know about Prentice Galt." His expression shifted immediately into something guarded, and then, when he saw my face, into something resigned. "How much do you already know?" "Enough," I said. "Tell me the rest." He told me, but it took 40 minutes and 2 cups of tea and one long silence in the middle where he had to collect himself, and at the end of it, I knew 3 things I had not known before. I knew that Prentice Galt had been a creditor in Pell's original debt, that he had been paid in full, but had retained copies of certain documents that could, if presented in the wrong light, create significant legal complications for the Drex estate. And I knew that he had been using those documents as quiet leverage for 2 years, asking for small favors, small pieces of information, building a foundation slowly enough that no individual request looked alarming. The third thing I learned was that Lady Dorinda Plume did not know the full extent of what Galt was doing. She had been used partially, but she was not the architect. She was another tool, or sharper than most, but a tool nonetheless. I brought Pell with me to find the Duke. The brothers met in the corridor outside the study, and the thing that passed between them in that moment was too private for me to watch. So I looked at the wallpaper until it was over. Then we all sat down together, and the real work began. The dinner on Friday was a masterpiece of controlled deception. Thornfeld House was lit warmly, the table set with the kind of quiet elegance that communicates wealth without announcing it, which is the most intimidating kind. Lord Ambrose was present, which made the gathering feel social and unthreatening. Pell was present, which Galt would not have expected and could not quite hide his reaction to. I was present as well, introduced simply as the Duke's correspondence secretary, a fact so bordering on the ordinary that Gort would have to work to find a reason to object to it. Lord Prentice Gort was a man of perhaps 45, with a pleasant face arranged over an unpleasant nature, the kind of face that had spent decades being underestimated and had learned to rely on that. He came in with confidence and settled into his chair with the ease of a man who believed he was the most strategically positioned person in any room he entered. He had not yet understood the room he had entered. Lady Dorinda was not there. The Duke had sent her a polite note that morning, citing a private family dinner. I had watched her face when she read it, in the front entrance where she had arrived uninvited and early, and I had seen something real move through her for the first time, something that was not performance. She had looked at me. Not with hostility this time, with something closer to understanding. She left without a scene, which told me she was more intelligent than her choices had suggested, and I found myself hoping, in some small and genuine way, or that she would direct that intelligence somewhere it could do her actual good. The dinner began. The food was excellent. The conversation was careful. Lord Ambrose told 2 stories that were both funny and entirely harmless, which I was beginning to understand was one of his genuine gifts. Pell spoke little, but watched everything. The Duke was his most contained self, precise and courteous, giving Gort nothing to read, which I noticed was making Gort work harder with every course. A man who is working to read a room will eventually make the mistake of letting the room read him. It happened over the port. The Duke mentioned, with the off-handedness of a man sharing an unimportant update, that his solicitor had completed a full audit of the Drex estate documents and had found several anomalies in records from 3 years ago. He said it while looking at his glass. He said it while Pell nodded calmly beside him, and Lord Ambrose appeared to find a thread on his sleeve deeply interesting. Galt's hand tightened on his glass. It was very small. Most people would not have seen it. I was sitting at the correct angle, and I had been watching his hands all evening, specifically for this, because hands tell the truth when faces have learned to lie. The Duke looked up then, and his eyes found Galt's, with the precision of a man who has known exactly where to look and has been waiting politely for the right moment to do it. "I understand," the Duke said pleasantly, "that you have been holding certain documents related to that period, on behalf of my brother's former business arrangements." Galt set his glass down. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you are," the Duke said. Still pleasant. Still entirely still. "I also think you are intelligent enough to understand that what those documents represent is significantly less useful to you now that the full audit exists. Context, as it turns out, is everything." Pell said, without any particular emotion. "The debt was paid in full and has been for 3 years. I have the receipts, properly witnessed and dated. I should have produced them sooner. I did not. That was an error I have corrected." The room was very quiet. Galt looked between the 2 brothers, then at Lord Ambrose, who had stopped pretending to examine his sleeve and was now simply watching with calm and patient attention. Then his eyes moved to me, and I saw the moment he understood how long I had been finding things and handing them to the right people. "You set a trap," he said. "I invited you to dinner," the Duke said. "What you walked into was entirely your own construction." What followed was not dramatic in the explosive sense. There was no shouting, no threats, no scene. Galt was too careful a man for that, and too aware that the ground had entirely shifted beneath him. The conversation was conducted in the continued low tones of a dinner party, and it resulted, by the end of the evening, in the return of every document in Galt's possession, a signed agreement facilitated by the Duke's solicitor, who had been waiting in a side room through the entire meal, and Galt's departure from London within the fortnight for a prolonged visit to a distant property. Sable Critch. When Lord Ambrose's quiet inquiries reached her the following week, turned out to have been acting primarily out of personal grievance rather than coordinated scheme. She had been feeding Galt small pieces of information for money. Confronted with evidence and offered a clean resolution, she chose the resolution, packed her belongings, and left without requiring further management. The crisis did not end with a collision. It ended with a slow and deliberate unwinding, each thread pulled at the correct tension until the whole knotted thing simply came apart. I was at my desk the following Monday when the Duke came into the study and stood for a moment without speaking. This was not unusual. He often moved through the room in silence. But this silence had a different quality. It was the silence of a man preparing to say something he had been thinking about for longer than the immediate moment. I set down my pen. "Miss Cresswick," he said. "Your Grace." He moved to the window, looked out at the orderly garden for a moment, then turned. "You came to me with 4 words and a proposal that had nothing to do with what I actually needed." "I came to you with what I had," I said. "And what you had," he said, "turned out to be considerably more than either of us understood at the time." He paused. "Griff has informed me he intends to take a position with a firm in Edinburgh at the end of the season. He has wanted to go home for some time. I have been keeping him here by inertia and mutual habit." I looked at him carefully. "I see. I am not offering you Griff's title," he said. "His position was never the right shape for what you actually do." He moved to the desk and stood on the other side of it, close enough that I could see the line of his jaw, the particular directness of his gaze when he had decided to stop being contained about something. "I am offering you a newly defined role. Full correspondence management, access to all estate records, a seat at the table when decisions are being prepared, not after they have been made." He paused. "A wage that reflects the work correctly and without negotiation, because you should not have to argue for what you are worth." I was quiet for a moment. "That is a very considerable offer," I said. "It is a fair one," he said. "There is a difference." I looked at him across the desk. This man who had whispered 2 words to me in a ballroom full of people who expected silence, who had opened a door when every convenient excuse existed to keep it shut, who had said thank you to me for the first time on a Tuesday, and had been finding new reasons to say it ever since. "There is one condition of my own," I said. He waited. "My sister Dottie's season," I said. "I will fund it myself from this wage. I want that clearly understood. I am not asking for assistance. I am telling you that it will not interfere with my work, and I want no one in this household to treat it as something to be managed or accommodated as a favor." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "Clearly understood," he said. "Then yes," I said. "I accept." He nodded once, but the way a man nods when a thing he wanted to happen has happened, and he is not yet ready to say that aloud. That was not the end, of course. Things like this do not end in offices over accepted offers, no matter how much weight those moments carry. There were weeks ahead of continued work, and Dottie's successful season, and Pell's slow and genuine effort to rebuild something honest with the Cresswick family. There was Lord Ambrose, who took personal and gleeful credit for the whole resolution on the grounds that his presence at the dinner had been indispensable, which was not entirely wrong. There was Mrs. Quell, who said nothing when she brought me tea one afternoon in the study, but brought it in the good cup, which I had learned was her highest form of approval. And there was a day in early autumn when the Duke and I were walking through the orderly garden after a long afternoon of work, in the particular companionable quiet that had built itself between us over months of shared purpose and honesty, and he said something that was not a proposal and not a declaration, and not any of the formal things that stories are supposed to contain at their conclusions. He said, "I am glad you walked across that ballroom." I looked at the garden, at the late roses and the gravel path and the pale afternoon sky above the stone walls. "So am I," I said. And that was enough. Between two people who had already said the difficult things and done the hard things and trusted each other through the kind of trouble that shows you who someone actually is, that small and honest sentence was more than enough. It was everything.